Today we have an interesting topic that we are going to treat today. Today we are going to look at the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, which has been shortened to be the ARPS, the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. Before we begin our lesson, I would urge you to subscribe to the channel for more educative, informative, and entertaining, of course, content. In our previous videos, we looked at the constitutional developments in the Gold Coast, and we studied between the period of 1900 to 1951, and therefore we are going to continue with this. This runs parallel with that topic. A nationalist activity, being the broad topic, runs parallel with the constitutional development. So as these nationalist activities were taking place, the very same constitutional development that the educated elite were asking for was also taking place. So today we will look at one of the nationalist activities. We will look at the period between 1900 to 1945, and this was before the First World War. And then we will look at the nationalist activities that also took place after the Second World War. That's after 1945. So we'll begin with the first of them, that is the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. Subscribe and also share and recommend it to your friends as well. Good. So let's begin with our discussion for today. So basically, we will be looking at the Aborigines Society in general. But before we look at the Aborigines Society, we then have to look at the concept of nationalism, as that was beginning at this time. So you should be able to explain the concept of nationalism in your own words. And again, you should also be able to outline the aims and achievement of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. So their aims and what they also, of course, wanted to achieve as a society. Then we also look at the failures of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, what they were not able to achieve as a society. So these are going to be our lesson objectives, and of course our lesson is going to be around these areas. So let's begin with the first one. What is nationalism? If you are asked about nationalism, and Prof. Hans has defined nationalism as a state of mind and an act of consciousness in which supreme loyalty is felt towards a state. So in nationalism, it is a state of mind. It is something that you condition yourself into, you put yourself into. So you condition your mind that this is who I am now. So it's an act of consciousness whereby you now come to accept a particular state or a particular country as for you, and therefore your loyalty, of course, belong to that particular country. Now, when we bring the definition of nationalism in the context of West African political history, we can say that nationalism, as we can apply to the West Africans at this time, was a struggle by people with a common identity, to free themselves from foreign control and exploitation, in order to embark upon a program which would ensure their socio-economic and political advancement. So when we apply this to the West Africans or the Gold Coasters, at this time we realize that the people were now coming to see themselves as one people devoid of ethnic background. So ethnicity had no room at this period. At this period, the people saw the need to come together as one people instead of fighting each other as we had seen in pre-colonial times, but to come together and forge one unity, one political force, so that they can free themselves from, this foreign control and exploitation that they were being taken into. And so this kind of expression, or this aspiration, or this nationalism that the people were exhibiting at this time were in two stages. The first stage is what we termed as the proto-nationalism, and then the second stage is what we term as the militant or mass or radical nationalism. The proto-nationalism emerged before the First World War, or after the First World War. That was 1919 to 1930. That is before the First World War. That was the kind of nationalism that was emerging. We call it the proto-nationalism, and that's the beginning of nationalism. Now, this type of nationalism, or at this stage, the people were not demanding for a total or immediate granting of independence to them. So they were not asking for independence, that give us freedom, or give us, or leave our country, or give our country for us to rule, but rather they were demanding that the colonial governor trim the rough edges of the colonial administration, so that it will allow a greater participation of the educated elite, or of the Africans or the Gold Coasters into the government of the colonial administration. And so that is what the educated elite at this time were asking for. And so they relied on diplomacy and constitutional means in addressing their grievance. So they did not, use much of the radical ways of demanding, as we had seen in other countries like Kenya and other East African countries, whereby the people were actually fighting, engaging in battle with the Europeans in order for them to get their independence. At this time, the people were using diplomacy. You talk, I talk, and then constitutional means, whereby they were asking for certain changes and demands in the constitution. So it was marked by protest and demands. Just, of course, protesting, having conferences, writing in newspapers, just to critique the government on certain things, the colonial government on certain things that was going on. So at this time, there wasn't anything like strike or any radical method. And so if you recall, the 1903 Constitution that we looked at, from 1903 to 1916, called Clifford Constitution, to 1925, the Gettysburg Constitution, you realize that in all those constitutions, the people were not demanding for immediate independence. They were only demanding that Africans or the educated elite were given a greater majority, a greater participation, and that period is what was termed as the proto-nationalism. Now, the second form of nationalism that we looked at, or that happened, was after the Second World War. The Second World War brought with it so many changes that we have already talked about, hardship and other things that were said in the course of after the war. And so the Second World War, the kind of nationalism, the educated elite who were now demanding for reforms and trimming of colonial, of course, edges, administration and all of that, were now into asking for a total demand for independence, immediate granting for independence. And that is what we term as a militant, mass and radical nationalism. Of course, at this time they were not using, or the method that they used was not that of demands or protest, but rather they used certain radical methods like strikes, demonstration, boycotting, and all of that to demand for self-determination, to be giving them the right to vote. So the Aborigines Rights Protection Society will fall under the proto-nationalist spirit or period or stage, because at that time we realized that the demands of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society were not that of granting independence, immediate independence for the Gold Coasters, but rather changing of certain colonial policies that were being meted out to the people. And that is what that is what you should look at. But when we take a look at the second form of nationalism or stage of nationalism, that is the militant or the mass or radical nationalism, you realize that all the constitutions that were promulgated after the Second World War, that is after 1945, you realize that all the constitutions that were promulgated were giving much and greater participation to the Africans. For instance, when you look at the 1946 Constitution of Banks, you saw that for the first time Africans were now given majority in the Legislative Assembly, because at this time the people's demand had changed. Their attitude towards nationalism had also changed. When you look at the 1951 Constitution as well, and for the first time Africans were also given majority in the Executive Council. So you see that the constitutions, the first two constitutions, the 1903, 1916, 1925, were somehow moderate, and that, is found under the proto-nationalist group. However, from 1946 to 1951 to 1956, you realize that all the constitutions that came were radical. They were it was all towards granting self-independence to the people. So let's go back to the Aborigines Rights Protection Society, and then we looked at some of the things that they actually were demanding for. But before that, let's look at the background to the formation of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. I hope you understand the whole issue about the nationalism. That was just to give you a background information, just to prepare you as to how the people were thinking now. And so let's then look at the background to the formation. Why was the Aborigines Rights Protection Society formed? So quickly we'll look at that. Now, the Aborigines was formed in 1897, and it was formed by Ghanaians to resist the British effort at formalizing their rule, of course, during the era of the partition of Africa. So you recall in partition of Africa that there was a principle which stated an effective occupation, that the colonial power should effectively set up a government on the colony before it would be considered as hers. And therefore the Europeans, after the partition, came in with the idea of taking up lands and establishing an effective government machine on the colony. And so in 1894, Sir William Branford Griffith introduced a Crown of Land Bill, and in this bill, according to Sir William, it was to vest all wasteland, forest lands, and minerals lands in the British Crown. The land bill was met with agitation from the local chiefs, and the chiefs did not agree to that. So what this bill seeked to do was that all wastelands, lands which were of course considered as being wasted, all the forest lands, all the mineral lands, it means that all the lands in Africa, all the lands in the Gold Coast were to be given to the British Crown. It means that the British Crown was going to be the owner of the land of the Gold Coast. You understand? All the forest land, all the mineral lands were to be given to the Crown. And of course, the people will not sit there and watch, of course, their land, ancestral lands to be given to another queen elsewhere. So the local chiefs, including the educated elite, all agitated, and this bill was withdrawn. But 3 years later, in 1897, a new governor came, Sir William Maxwell. Sir William Maxwell then amended that land bill because the British still needed what? The land. Because if you want to colonize the people, you need what? You need the land. And so Maxwell then amended that law, and in it says that all lands not yet acquired for public use were to be vested in the British Crown. So with this one, it is almost the same as the first one. All lands not yet acquired were to be vested in the British Crown. It's still saying that lands in the Gold Coast were to be given to what? To the British Crown. And these were affected, lands which were not visibly used by the people. So all the lands that the people were seen not to use on occupied lands were all to be given to the Queen. But if it was already occupied, of course, to this bill, it means it wasn't for the Queen. But we all know that lands, unoccupied lands in the Gold Coast, in Ghana today, in Africa, are for somebody. They are either stool lands or individual lands or even family lands. And so there is nothing like an occupied land. And so if it is not occupied, then it means that it has not belonged to anybody. No. So the people again organized another fresh protest that they will resist the land bill of 1897. And so in 1897, in that same year, May, at Cape Coast, the chiefs, teachers, lawyers, and businessmen in the Gold Coast, they formed the Aborigines Rights Protection to protest against the Crown Land Ordinance of 1894 and again 1897, the Brantford one as well as the Maxwell one. And we all know that these bills sought to transfer the ownership of their ancestral lands to the British Crown. So primarily, the Aborigines Rights Protection Society was actually formed to resist the Crown Land Ordinances or the Land Bill introduced by both Brantford and then Maxwell as well. Search for the meaning of Aborigines. I will not tell you, but look for the meaning of Aborigine. When we say Aborigine, what do we mean by Aborigine? So you search for the meaning of Aborigine, and you would understand why they call themselves the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. So let's look at some of their aims. And don't forget, this was a society. It was more or less like an organization. Like today we have of course we have NAGRAT, the National Association of Graduate Teachers, GMA, the Ghana Medical Association, of course, which is made up of only medical doctors, just to fight for the cause of doctors in the country. And so that is how these associations were formed. They were more or less like those associations, just to agitate when they feel that certain things being done to them were not in the right direction. So let's look at the aims and objectives of this association. So the first one was that it was formed to oppose the Land Bill of 1897, and we have already made that clear. 1987, because of the Land Bill, which sought to transfer all unoccupied lands to the Crown. So the first objective was to oppose the Land Bill, and that is one of their aim or objectives. And also to protest and also to protect the land of the Gold Coast. So yes, we are forming this society to protest that particular land bill, but also future land bills we would also, of course, prevent, or we will not allow. So to also to protect the lands of the Gold Coast. And also to unite the chiefs. There were other ones, to unite the chiefs and the people of the Gold Coast, and also to serve as the medium of communication also between the people of the Gold Coast and the British. And so the society also aimed at encouraging the youth to study their history and traditional institutions. Good. Now, before we come to even the founding fathers of this society, let's not forget that the issue of land was a big problem for the colonial administrators. And I'll tell you something when it comes to the achievement of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. Good. So let's look at some of the founding members of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. So Jacob Wilson Say was elected the first president. James Kwedru Agri, that we know, that Agri Memorial is named after, became the first secretary. And then we had J.P. Brown, who also became the vice president. Then we had John Mensah Saba, who I really admire and love his name, was also their lawyer or spokesman. Actually, he was the one who came up with this whole idea of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. So he became the lawyer. Good. We also had Kwabena Sechi, another interesting indigenous son of the Gold Coast, Kwabena Sechi. And we also had Joseph Castle Hayford, whom the Casford Hall in the University of Cape Coast has been named after him. Then J.W. de Graft Johnson. All these people became the leaders or the members or the founding members of the Aborigines Rights Protection Society. Good. So let's see if they were able to achieve anything at all, because we have stated that this is the aims of the society, the Aborigines. Were they able to achieve some of the aims that they had outlined or the objectives? So the Aborigines then sent a delegation, a 3-member delegation to London. And these 3, of course, members included Jacob W.C., T.F.E. Jones, and then George Hughes. And these 3 were to present a petition in respect to the land bill to the Secretary of State for the colonies. At that time was Joseph Chamberlain in May 1898. And subsequently, Chamberlain instructed the governors to withdraw the land bill. So yes, they sent a delegation to, London, to the colonial secretary of state for the colonies, Joseph Chamberlain, that we don't want this happening in our country. And therefore, Chamberlain, instructed the governor to withdraw the bill. So they were able to achieve one of their objectives, that is to protest against what? The land bill. And let me tell you something, this land bill, this was a very great achievement, because as I have said earlier, the issue of lands were so delicate and dangerous, to the extent that if you go to countries like Kenya and other African countries, South Africa and co., the British, the Europeans actually took over the lands that belonged to the people. Yes. And they made the people slaves on those lands. And that was the reason why there was an armed struggle in those African countries. And so for the Aborigines Rights Protection Society to have been able to take back our land from the British, to force the British colonial administrators to abandon their idea of investing or vesting all the land, all the Gold Coast land in the British Crown, was a great achievement. And that is why our independence, or our gaining of independence, became so smooth and less bloody as compared to Kenya, Uganda, and other countries. Because in other countries they had succeeded, in other colonies the British had actually succeeded in taking up the lands that belonged to the people. And so this was a very great achievement that these people were able to secure for the people of the Gold Coast. Again, the Aborigine also established its own newspaper called the Gold Coast Aborigines. And through its various publications, it educated also the people on the implication of the various bills and ordinances of the colonial government. So it also succeeded in also having its own newspaper, and this newspaper became a mouthpiece whereby the Aborigines were using it to write or to protest about some of the ordinances and bills that were being introduced by the colonial government. At that time, there wasn't anything like press, press meeting, or whereby you meet the press and they put camera or you and you talk to the people. At this time, they were using the newspapers and go to what? To write, to protest, to demand for what was due them. But the Aborigines also put pressure on the British administration to suspend the hot and the poll tax. It was in addition successful in forcing the British to cancel the Forest Bill of 1910. So all the various bills that they found not appropriate were all, cancelled. The poll tax, the Forest Bill, and all of that. Then the Aborigine Right Protection Society also acted as what? A mouthpiece for the people. A mouthpiece for the people, and that became a platform where the grievances of the Africans were actually articulated. So, they met, to talk about some of the things that were happening. The Aborigine Right Protection Society also succeeded in uniting the chiefs and the people of the Gold Coast, especially the educated elite, because the issue of land, both is about the chiefs and it's also about the educated elite. The chiefs owned the land, but the educated elite also saw what was happening in other colonies with regarding to land, and so they all came together to protest against that. Then finally, in the field of education, the Aborigines Right Protection Society called for a system of education geared to the improvement of the culture of the people. So in February 1902, the Gold Coast Aborigines wrote, "We want educated Fantis, not Europeanized native." And this is very huge. And Ghana, or after independence, we still suffered from this illness, if I may put it that way. A lot of the things that were being taught in schools at this period were all about European mountains, European, kings, European histories, European rivers, and the Gold Coasters, or the people in the Gold Coast, were not actually learning about themselves. And so after school, what of course happens is that after school, you become an Europeanized native. You are a native of the Gold Coast, but your mindset, your attitudes, your behaviors, what you even think about are all Europe. And today we still have some educated people who are like that. They are Ghanaian, all right, but everything they talk about is Europe. Football, Europe. Movies, Europe. Food, Europe. Dressing, Europe. Name, Europe. Everything about them is European. And you become a Europeanized native. You are not educated Fanti. We want a Fanti who is educated, who is proud of his culture as Fanti, who is proud of his culture as well, the Ghanaian. And so this was also profound. This was very, very huge. And this has been a problem from that time, 1897, 1902, from colonial period, even up to now. Even though now things are somehow trying to change. But that was some of the achievement. And I think that they did a great job, quite a great job. They did very, very well. And I think we will give them a standing ovation. However, as an association, they had their own failures, they had their own issues. Let's look at some of the things that they were not able to achieve as a society, all right? Yes, we are seeing that the Aborigine Right Protection Society also became inactive where there was no controversial bill. The reason was that the society considered itself purely a protest movement. Yes, a society. So if the government, or if the colonial government does not introduce any controversial policy, you don't hear of them. You understand? So they become like, it's not something that we are going to be doing always, but we are watching, and that wasn't good enough, because it may lead to the fall of the society. Again, the Aborigines Right Protection Society had its front broken because of petty squabbles between the chiefs and the educated elite. The chiefs refused to recognize the elite, whom the chiefs, felt were usurping their legitimate authority, while the educated elite also had the belief that the chiefs could not be the right representation of the people. And don't forget that this has been the issue all this while when we started to talk, we started to look at during the constitutional developments, who was really representing the people now. Is it the chiefs or the educated elite? And the chiefs are thinking that you are usurping our power. We are traditional rulers. The educated elite are also saying that no, we are educated, and by our education we should rule. And so these two people can, of course, not be in one society and succeed. So yeah, the front was broken, and that will lead to the fall of the society. Again, the Aborigines also concentrated their activities mainly in the cities and urban areas, leaving out the rural areas. So they did not also seek a mass support of the people. You understand? They were only interested in the cities. They were in the cities, instead of to go to the people, the local people, of course the market people, those in the rural areas, to seek for their support. They didn't, and so it also led to their fall. Then the 1925 Constitution of Gettysburg also negatively affected the activities of the society. Now, under the Gettysburg Constitution, the Provincial Council of Chiefs came to be regarded as the official channel for the expression of the people's view. And so that constitution, which actually created, as we have seen, the Provincial Council of Chiefs, gave them a representation of 6 or so, of course, while the educated elite were only given 3, also came to, affect the activities of the society, because initially they were all together, but now the constitution is now coming to regard or coming to support the chiefs because of the British policy of indirect rule. And so the educated elite were also, they also felt betrayed, and that also supports the number two point, which says that the front was also broken because of the petty squabbles. Good. I think you have enjoyed the lesson for today. Yes, the most important thing right now is just to revise your book and also subscribe to the channel. If you have any question or anything, my contact is down there. You can easily call or WhatsApp me. Good. But before I leave you, let me give you some trivia. This was an object question which came in 2017, highlight any 4 reasons for the formation of the Aborigines, and then also name any 3 delegates sent by the Aborigines Right Protection Society to Queen Victoria in England in May 1898. I hope you remember their names, the 3 people who were sent to London in May 1898 to have the land bill cancelled. Thank you, and we shall meet